Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished health tech professional and an author from Pennsylvania, USA, Dr. Tia Warrick. Tia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Tia is a public health director and a clinical research and an AI expert. She's the CEO of Lesous Consulting, and she's an author of a book titled Burst the Bubble, A Look into Careers in the Pharmaceutical Industry. So, Tia, my first question, what inspired you to pursue a career in public health and clinical research?
That's a fantastic question. And it was a lot of things. My family is originally from St. Lucia, which is a small Caribbean island in
Mhm,
South America.
mhm,
And essentially, I grew up actually in New York City. And when I used to visit family in St. Lucia, there was a lot of differences back then when I was younger.
mhm,
I used to wonder why we had to boil water, right? When we visited family in St. Lucia,
mhm,
or why there weren't sidewalks or specific things that I noticed that was in New York that wasn't in particularly St. Lucia. So I would ask these questions, and I was really inquisitive as a kid, and passionate about understanding differences and distributional differences globally. And I wanted to contribute to finding solutions for a lot of the different problems.
mhm,
That only grew stronger as I got older,
mhm,
to kind of think about solutions on a population level.
mhm,
And then I kind of thought about different ways I can actually test for those solutions to be, effective or not. And that's how I kind of fell into clinical
mhm,
research.
mhm. Wow, what a great response. Thank you. You worked extensively in epidemiology and AI-driven workforce development. How has your own perspective evolved about healthcare over the years?
It's a great question. So my perspective of healthcare over the years have kind of, it wasn't linear,
Hmm.
right? It ebbed and flowed, and it specifically had to deal with a lot of different things. When we think about um, patient populations, different disease distributions, as well as the climate politically, what's going on when we think
Yeah.
about healthcare. But the main and the one thing that stayed constant for me
Hmm.
was my drive
Hmm.
to essentially contribute to that industry.
Hmm.
And so, when I first started in the healthcare industry, I started as a clinical research coordinator. And that is a very entry level position where you work with doctors at a
Hmm.
hospital or academic institution.
Hmm.
And you essentially help with all the different tasks for a clinical trial. So you can
Hmm.
collect data, you can schedule patient appointments, you can even spin blood down in a lab.
Hmm.
So it was my, a very, very entry level position and job. And I've
Hmm.
seen, all kinds of, doctors and all kinds of situations.
Hmm.
But what made it worth it for me was when, a patient came in and they really were in pain or they really needed help. And then seeing a doctor really help them, and also seeing that, the trial that I was helping manage
Hmm.
truly brought them a treatment that they otherwise would have never had access to.
Hmm.
That kind of really lit a fire in me with a passion. And so even though nothing's perfect and healthcare has
Hmm.
its ebbs and flows, I do think that overall there's a lot of greatness that has been contributed in the healthcare industry, and it's
Hmm.
something that I'm very passionate about. So for me,
Fantastic.
it's always been a constant in my life, but
Hmm.
there's always going to be good and bad with
Yeah,
everything that you do.
absolutely. Well said. So let's talk about your consulting program, Lesous Consulting, which is really, as per my understanding, a professional development, training, education, and technology solutions organization. Um, what are some of the key industries you serve, and how has your company's impact grown over the years?
Yeah. So my industry that I specifically serve is biotech, pharmaceutical,
Hmm.
healthcare. So I'm highly specialized for the clinical research industry.
Right.
Um, and so I specifically focus on skills-based competency training.
Yeah.
And it's very different from the courses you think. When we think
Mm,
about e-learning, we think about, general courses to give you an overview of a particular topic,
mm,
which is fantastic. But what I'm trying to do is accelerate the definition of what it means to have experience,
mm,
right? I know there's many people who can really resonate with this. They go on LinkedIn or a job site um, relative to your country, and
mm,
you read all of the job descriptions, right? And maybe you go down each bullet point and say, oh yeah, I can definitely do this part of the job, or I
mm,
may not be able to do that part of the job. So
mm.
at the end of it, you may feel, I'm 60% confident that I can do this job, but
Right.
I'm not going to apply because I don't feel 100%
Mm,
confident.
mm,
And those are a lot of missed opportunities. So those are the skills-based competency training that I focus on,
mm,
job-specific skills. So a great example for the pharmaceutical and biotech industry are business development managers.
mm,
Um, and one of their job skills is to be able to do something we call proposals or
mm,
bid defense slides to kind of show different pharma companies about particular services. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, we have specific courses that teaches you
mm,
how to do a proposal or how to do a particular presentation. And that's just one
mm.
example, right? We have different roles like for data managers, for safety managers, specific job skills to make you feel
Very
empowered.
interesting.
And so that you can say, I did take this course, I do have the certification, I do feel a bit more confident in applying
Mm,
to this job. And it really does accelerate what it means to be experienced because a lot of companies, you don't learn those things until you get hired, right?
mm.
And you take years to learn that particular
Correct.
skill, and then companies may not have that retention to then retain the talent that took the time to
Mm,
learn all those
mm,
skills,
mm.
and then employees may not feel like they could stay at that company, so it's a vicious cycle. And so I'm trying to accelerate that process of what it means to be
Well
experienced.
said.
And that's
And
my
yeah, and tell me, what are some of the critical gaps in the
Mhm.
healthcare workforce today, and how are you helping to mitigate some of these gaps?
Yeah, so there's a lot of critical gaps in the healthcare workforce, but I think the biggest thing when we just dial back, it's so easy to look at all the small little things that
Mm,
is causing, a lot of gaps. It all comes down to efficiency.
mm,
When I took a look at everything that's happening, it always comes back to efficiency.
mm,
And so for me, I built ASUS, which is the AI software.
mm, mm.
It's a technology solution that just does that. It helps with efficiency. I know there's a lot of, discourse on whether we are for or against AI because
Mm.
it can and will replace some jobs and they will become obsolete. But
Right.
my focus when using AI is really focusing on empowering a role
Mm, mm,
and helping with the administrative bottlenecks, right?
mm.
So, clinical research, about 80% of clinical trials fail. 80%. And
Wow.
so that only means 20% is a success.
Mm,
And so, why? I asked myself, why is 80% failing? And it boils down to efficiencies.
mm,
And I say this really stark comment because it's very important
mm,
that the only people who are truly losing out on this are the patients, right?
mm,
80% of treatments that may maybe or could have been effective um, failed, right? And some of those was really the only kind of treatments for specific patients, especially for rare disease
correct.
and other kind of like disorders.
Mm,
And so for me, I say patients are like dying because of paperwork. A
right.
lot of it happens due to timelines, bottlenecks, reporting requirements. And so that's what ASUS does. It helps efficiency with looking at and streamlining contracting. It streamlines budget creation, resource allocation. It does distribution for feasibility. So it really finds areas where patients are actually located who has the burden of the disease
Mm-hmm.
so that, sponsors are not going into areas just because it's a huge, huge university, but
Mm,
and they don't have the patients, but they're actually going into the areas that the patients are located and truly need the
mm,
treatment so they
mm.
have access. And so there's a lot of efficiencies that needs to be looked at in the industry. And so ASUS is a AI software that helps detect all of those
Mm.
efficiencies from
How
startup
amazing.
to close out. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Um, but tell me, what are some of the challenges healthcare companies face when
Yeah,
implementing AI-driven solutions? Because ultimately, the people who have to implement them need to be trained. How do you support them?
absolutely. That is a really great statement because as we know, there's a lot of different software out there,
Mm,
and everyone is a little bit desensitized to software. We have
mm,
to learn every single software, and it's becoming a little bit overwhelming and almost like a burden. And
mm,
so that training piece, when I developed ASUS, I made sure to think about the UX design. How is the interface going to be
mm,
user friendly? I think that the ideas of when you're creating a software
mm,
becomes so granular that we forget that, that end product, what it looks
mm,
like, and that usability is just as important as all the things happening on the background when
mm,
building a software. And so for me, when I made ASUS, it's truly user friendly in the interface. There's
mm,
few buttons and commands,
mm,
and it integrates into each other and gives you the information that you need. And so
mm,
we just have, like I said, four buttons: the users and where you can see your information, the AI that can spit out, and then it also organizes all of your thoughts for
mm,
you, and
mm,
it has folders that it organizes for you with audit trails, and then it also has prompts that tells you this is what you do for the next step.
mm.
So the training is actually built into the software.
Well
So
said.
you're not wondering how to use a particular thing or how
Mm,
to essentially understand why it works.
mm.
That's why I think I love AI, because you don't have to essentially guess, right? You don't have to
Correct.
have a separate manual.
Mm,
The AI can literally train you just as much as it can provide you with the solutions you're looking for within the software.
mm. Wow. And given the fact that you are, the developer of Lesous software,
Mhm.
um, my next question is, are there any ethical considerations that organizations should keep in mind when integrating AI into healthcare and workforce training?
Absolutely. Patient um, confidentiality is the biggest concern, right?
Correct.
We want to make sure that the sharing of data stays within a particular organization.
Hmm.
So if you are building a software and
Hmm.
you are opening up to multiple organizations, you have to ensure that there's protections in place, that the AI on the back end is not collecting each organization's information and then using that to regurgitate it out, and not necessarily with intent, but information is information, right? So there has to be roadblocks built into the code when you're using the AI
Hmm.
to ensure that the information is staying within a particular unit, or what we call particular blockchains.
Hmm.
So if one organization A has all this information on particular patients, it stays with organization A, right? It shouldn't
Hmm.
be sharing information on the back end and then spitting out something for organization B.
Hmm.
And so it's really, really important to kind of think about patient confidentiality. There's HIPAA compliance, there's GDPR compliance,
Hmm.
which are regulations put in place to protect patients' information.
Hmm.
And so that's truly really important. And that's something that I put at the forefront. And many other companies who are developing software in healthcare should definitely make sure that they address those concerns when it comes to confidentiality.
Hmm. Well said. And,
Mhm.
Tia, a few minutes back, you were telling me about how 80% of clinical trials fail. Given
Yeah.
your vast experience in leading global clinical trials, what are some common challenges in multinational research efforts, and where does AI step in?
Yes, absolutely. So 80% is a stark number, right? So there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of
Correct.
different factors to that 80%. Obviously, a big piece is the efficacy, right? So if the treatment doesn't work, it's not going to make it to FDA approval.
Hmm.
It fails. But there's other really good chunks of that percentage that is attributed to startup timelines,
Hmm.
financial constraints, staffing constraints, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of different academic institutions may not have the resourcing or the staff to handle the load of the sheer amount of clinical trials
Hmm.
that is at a particular institution.
Hmm.
And so my AI specifically is going to focus on the things that we can do, right? We have no control of whether or not a treatment
Hmm.
um, will be successful. However, we can set it up for success in any way possible through um, essentially mitigating administrative processes.
Mm.
So 30%, if I can get that 30% more successful, so if I can reduce 80 to 50, then we have a 50-50 chance, right?
Mm.
So if the AI can speed up FDA regulatory approval process or help draft a particular regulatory document for each country's ethical committee, that
Mm.
would take people usually weeks to create a dossier and all the things needed for the application. That saves time. Why is time important? Because time, unfortunately, is money, right?
Mm.
So the longer a trial runs, the
Mm.
longer the sponsor or the biotech or pharma company has to pay
Mm.
everyone involved in participating in a clinical trial.
Mm.
And so the more money that is spent, unfortunately, is the more money that they have to recuperate back to
Mm.
their investors at the end of a trial when
Right.
they get FDA approval. And that makes treatments really expensive. So
Mm.
I know a lot of patients, who really need it may not even be able to afford it
Mm.
because of all of these administrative bottlenecks that basically went and contributed to why the cost is
Mm.
so high.
Mm.
It's not just because the pharma company is trying to make money, but it's
Mm.
more so they need to make the money back, the billions that they spent up until this point, and
Correct.
then also have enough to manufacture the drug. And so if we can create efficiencies at the very beginning and reduce those bottlenecks and timelines,
Mm.
then we can essentially ensure that we set the clinical trial up for success, but
Mm.
also hopefully and ultimately make treatments cheaper for
Yeah.
patients who really need
Mm. Very interesting. Two more
it.
questions relating to Lesous Consulting, and then I've got a couple of questions for your book. How do you support startups and organizations in optimizing their clinical trials?
Yeah, so I love working with startups.
Hmm.
They have a lot of passion, hungry, and also really green sometimes,
Correct.
right? They want to learn a little bit more about clinical research and they're passionate about their treatment or medical device that they've created. And for me, I get them ready by doing in-depth feasibility, right? So what makes and break a clinical trial is where you conduct it, right?
Hmm.
What your budget is, obviously, you have to have the budget to actually conduct the trial,
Hmm.
and essentially what your population distribution is, right? If a particular disease is really rare, it's
Hmm.
going to make your trial either really complex or really easy, right? Complex in the sense that a lot of rare diseases has very small populations, but these populations are usually very tight knit. There's usually a database or organization so that you can get the word out about that clinical trial. But
Hmm.
there may be hesitancy and trust issues with the treatment, right? So it really depends on the type of disease and the type of product that you're trying to put out there.
Hmm.
But I work with startup and
Yeah.
biotech companies, and I
Hmm.
help them with that feasibility process to set them up for success.
Amazing. My next question is that given the amount of research, the work that you've done, what trends do you foresee shaping the future of global clinical research and public health consulting?
Absolutely. That's a really great question.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of AI taking over the industry. I
Hmm.
know it's taking over every industry, right? And clinical research, I would like to describe as like a dinosaur, right? We are
Hmm.
a little
Yeah.
bit slower to jump into the future, and with good
Hmm.
reason, right? We are dealing with patients' lives, and we want to make sure that the information that we're collecting and the tools
Hmm.
that we're using is as accurate as possible. But I do see every industry
Hmm.
moving towards the direction of using AI for almost everything.
Hmm.
And the types of trends that I see is that we're an aging population.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of research and boom in neuroscience specifically because as we age is the biggest indicator for cognitive decline. And
Hmm.
so there's going to be a lot of different research looking at rare diseases, Alzheimer's, neurology, Parkinson's, Huntington's, that's really looking at those curative options. We are truly looking at a lot of precision medicine and
Right.
essentially using particular viruses for gene therapy by attenuating the virus and removing what makes you sick out of that virus, and
Hmm.
then encoding it with whatever gene or protein that's missing, and then essentially injecting that into the body so that now that virus can inject those particular proteins or genes into your cells, and your cells can start replicating what was missing and essentially be curative is what the hope is.
Wow.
So gene therapy, precision medicine is a huge market that's going to continue to grow.
Wow. Tia, we got a little more time left, and I want to talk to you about your book, Burst the Bubble, A Look into Careers in the Pharmaceutical Industry. I'll have time for two more questions in this. So my first question is, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about careers in the pharmaceutical industry that you aim to debunk in your book?
Yes, absolutely. So I am a professor as well. So I teach. And I remember speaking with a student and I asked them, what do you want to do after you graduate from college? And they said, I don't really know. I thought the only options was lawyer, doctor, nurse, but I don't really, I like science, but I don't really think I fit in any one of those roles. And so I said, what about clinical research? And they said, what's that? They're like, I don't want to be in a lab coat and so I thought, okay, so a lot of misconceptions are, a lot of people, when they think of pharmaceutical companies, they think of like, big bad pharma or a crazy scientist in a coat. But in reality, there's hundreds of different positions, right? For any one given clinical trial, 800 people can work on that on the life cycle of one trial, right? So there's a lot of different roles that contribute, from data managers to business managers, to safety managers, to project managers. And so the actual field is booming and it's broad, and there's so many amazing career pathways. I just don't think that, especially students and people who are even professionals in the field, truly knows just how large the network is and how many opportunities there are.
Right.
So student asked me, naturally, as a professor, you want to give the student a reference or some kind of, information to kind of look into it more. And when I tried to look up books, they were far and few between. And so I got inspired and I said, you know what, I want to create a book that really breaks down all the different pathways in careers, clinical research, so that people can get more awareness about just how broad and how amazing the industry is and an impact that they can make. And there's a place for everyone in this industry. Absolutely. So I just want to create a book for just for that, to bring light and awareness.
Fascinating. And my last question for you, Tia, what advice would you give to young professionals considering a career in clinical research and pharmaceutical sciences?
I would say don't give up, right? It's a very competitive industry. And so if you see, especially on LinkedIn, you apply to a job and it may tell you some metrics sometimes. If it says 1,000 people apply to the job, apply anyway. If you feel like you only met 3 bullet points out of the 8 that's there for the job description, apply anyway. If you feel like you may be fantastic for the job, but you're just not sure if they will see how great you are, apply anyway. Do not essentially tell yourself no, right? You will get rejected many times in life, and that's just a part of it, right? But the first person you do not want to reject you is yourself. So always afford yourself the opportunity to every opportunity. Let them tell you no, there will always be another one, but do not miss out on an opportunity because you didn't believe in yourself and thought that you weren't good enough, because you are. You never know. So I would tell young professionals to give themselves a chance when they're looking into the clinical research industry.
Amazing. And on that incredible piece of advice, apply anyway. Those 2 words are so powerful. Thank you, Tia, for talking to me about your own journey. I think we covered a lot of very, very fascinating and interesting ground on what you are doing through your firm using AI, how you're supporting organizations. You spoke to me about critical gaps in the healthcare workforce. You talked to me about the challenges companies are facing and how you help them navigate. We also spoke about ethical considerations, about the support you give to startups and organizations. When you looked into your crystal ball, you said, what do you see as the future of global clinical research? And finally, you gave me some very, very interesting thoughts from your book, Burst the Bubble. Thank you for speaking to me, and all the very best to you.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. For platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.